I recognize some of the attendees thus far. Welcome. I know you've joined us in the past. For anybody who's joining us for the first time, I'll first introduce myself. So my name is Ainsley Williams, and I'm a counselor here at AGI. A little bit about AGI. We are a charitable organization that supports families and individuals living with dementia. Our services include individual and family counseling, support groups, activities for people living with dementia, and educational courses and workshops. Lectures such as this one are made possible by the generous support of the Lasner Learning Center and Lindsay Memorial Foundation. And before we begin, I just want to let you know that although the chat feature isn't available, we do have a Q&A section down below, and you can use that section to write any questions you had throughout today's presentation. We're going to take some time twice today to provide you with opportunity to ask questions, share your thoughts, and hopefully just time to reflect together on what we're seeing and what Naila is talking to us about. So today we are very honored to have Dr. Naila Kuhlmann with us. Naila is a postdoctoral fellow at McGill University and an associated researcher with the Center for Circus Arts Research, Innovation, and Knowledge Transfer. After completing a PhD in neuroscience at the University of British Columbia, Naila began her postdoc in 2020 by leading Peace of Mind, an arts-based knowledge translation project in which neuroscientists, performing artists, and people with lived experience came together to co-create performances on Parkinson's disease and dementia. Her current participatory research investigates how lived and felt experiences can be conveyed through the combination of arts and immersive technologies. So without further ado, please allow me to very warmly welcome Naila. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure. And I'll just open up my presentation right away and start it. So here we go. So yeah, today I'll be speaking about Peace of Mind, which was, as Ainsley said, an arts-based knowledge translation project. And what that means is that it was really using the arts to bridge or to bring together both scientific research and lived experience or knowledge from lived experience of neurodegenerative conditions. So a bit of background about myself. I started my journey into this project during my PhD. So in my PhD, I studied Parkinson's disease, and I started almost every presentation I gave off of with this iconic image of the first clinical description of Parkinson's and the way that it affects movement in people with Parkinson's disease. So in reality, though, I was far, far removed from humans. I was spending most of my time peering down a microscope. And this is actually an image that I took during my PhD. I was looking at brain cells and the way that brain cells or neurons communicate and how that's altered in Parkinson's disease. And so that led me to produce a PhD dissertation that I think about 10 people read. So my committee, maybe one or two friends got through the introduction. I also very proudly produced a lot of complex diagrams that, kind of outlined what I had learned in my PhD. But I was really left with these outputs of my research that were not at all accessible to the people that I'm hoping to help with my research. So even the title here of my dissertation is really just understood by a very small community of academic researchers who are doing the same kind of work. And so I was really left with this question of how do I bring my research and the knowledge that I produced throughout my PhD to the community? And then also, how do I bring the knowledge from the community back into my research in the questions I'm asking and in the ways I approach my research? So that led me to discover this term, arts-based knowledge translation. And in particular, I was very inspired by other arts-based research and I guess knowledge dissemination projects that were happening around Canada. So this one was a big source of inspiration from Pia Kontos and Julia Gray in Toronto. This play, Cracked: A New Light on Dementia, is based on people's caregivers, family members, and people with dementia's experiences of the changes throughout dementia, the changes in family dynamics, and they really beautifully capture that on stage. I was also inspired by Catherine Boydell's work with dance, so putting the experience of psychosis in adolescence into a dance performance, and even some circus projects. So here we have an aerial silks performance around the experience of epilepsy. And so these three projects really highlight how we can bring the emotional and the subjective experience of illness or of different ways of living onto the stage. But I was also curious how we could also bring the scientific, the very complex scientific information onto the same stage. So how can we both highlight the lived experience, the emotional and psychosocial aspects, as well as, complex mechanisms and information about how neurons are connecting and these things that usually end up in very complex diagrams. How could they be maybe made more captivating and more intuitive by putting them into the performing arts? So that's what led me to embark on Peace of Mind. And I was very lucky to find an academic supervisor who was willing to take me on for this project. So I could have, after my PhD, left the university and done this as an arts project, and that was one direction I was considering going. But I wanted to keep a research component in it, and I really wanted to be positioned in a place, so in a university setting, where I could also bring in researchers and bring in the knowledge from researchers and try to connect research more with communities. So that was really the goal. And I was very lucky to have Dr. Stephanie Blaine-Morais take me on as a student for this. So the aims and the methods of this project were twofold. The first one was really focused on the participants in the project. So the aim was to facilitate knowledge exchange and empathy between neuroscientists, artists, and people affected by either dementia or Parkinson's disease. So as I mentioned, my journey into this project was primarily through Parkinson's disease, which can also come with dementia. But Stephanie's lab is more focused on Alzheimer's disease and dementia, among other conditions. And so when I started this project with her, we decided to do two parallel projects, one on Parkinson's disease and one on Alzheimer's and dementia. So this first aim was really about creative collaboration. And the second aim then was the outcome of that, the public output of this project was to co-create performances based on scientific research and lived experience in order to engage with a wide audience and to really spark conversation and dialogue around Parkinson's and dementia. So here just outlining that the performances were multidisciplinary, and you'll see what I mean, but they involved circus, different types of dance, poetry. So it was really sampling or using different artistic disciplines to get our message across. And it was intersectoral, so really bringing these different communities together to create it, and multimedia. So disciplinary and multiple artistic media came together. So here I'll just take you briefly through the methods, so the process of what it was to create these. So this project started in 2020, right after the start of COVID-19. So we were about 3 months into the pandemic. And my intention originally was to bring everyone into the same room. And of course, we had to change that. We ended up bringing everyone together on the same Zoom. But the first step was really to form a team around this project. And so I recruited neuroscientists who were studying Parkinson's or dementia. I recruited different performing artists and then stakeholders. So that includes people with dementia or Parkinson's disease, as well as caregivers or family members. The very first step I took was I wanted to foster the connection between the neuroscientists and the artists before we all got together and started discussing, the scientific research of Parkinson's and dementia. I wanted to have something tangible that we could bring to our community partners. And so what we did at the very onset of this project was how neuroscience and the artists collaborate to create small videos that highlighted a different scientific question around Parkinson's and dementia, or a scientific finding from the neuroscientists involved in this project. So these are all on our YouTube channel, and they're about 2 to 5 minutes each, and they use things such as, for example, tap dance to look at some of the cellular changes in Alzheimer's. There's a little balancing act that looks at cognitive reserve and what supports our cognitive abilities throughout life. There's a dance about some of the, again, really cellular mechanisms. So it was quite the range of projects. And this was really to act as, again, something tangible to bring to our community members, to make the science more accessible, but it also helped us find these, I guess, little starting points for what the performance might look like. So to offer, okay, do we want to do tap dance? Do we want to do balancing acts? What resonates with people? What works well? What doesn't? So these were really the first little sketches, or the first little tries of what this could look like. And then, as I said, we all met on Zoom. So this is actually a picture from our Parkinson's project, and we have Rebecca Barnstaple, which some of you might know Rebecca. She leads a lot of dance and a lot of movement for both Parkinson's disease and dementia. And so she facilitated these movement sessions. Every time we met, we would start with dance or with movement. It was often quite playful, a lot of improvisation, a lot of getting to know one another through movement, and just playing and being joyful together. For the dementia project, it was Ariane Boulet who led these sessions. It looked very different, but similarly, we would always start with dance and movement. And we would try to pull also from these art science videos as an inspiration for what we did each session. And then from there, after spending about 45 minutes moving together or creating together in some way, we would end with a discussion and a debrief. So again, this looked different in the Parkinson's and Dementia project. I'll focus more on the Dementia project. So for dementia, we had 3 participants with dementia at different stages, and 3 family members or informal caregivers. And the discussion part ended up being more with the caregivers. So we really prioritized movement and creativity to involve people with dementia, particularly across a screen. And then the discussion was more with the family members around what themes would we like to focus on, or what key messages would we like to have come out in the performances. And we also supplemented that with some offline surveys. So some of the things that were identified in the sessions, we then followed up by doing surveys as well. That led into a creation. So here we are, one of the first times we were in studio. These are the performers, and they're just exploring some of the things that came up in the Zoom sessions. We really tried to start the collaboration on Zoom, so to start forming some of the ideas of the music and of what we would have on stage through our collaborations on Zoom, and then bring that into the studio and keep checking back with the people who couldn't be physically there with us. So every week when we were doing this in studio, I would report back, I would send videos of what we're working on, and I would ask for feedback as to whether it would align, or whether it aligned with what people were wanting to see in the performance, whether it was truthful to their experiences, etc. I'll give some examples later to make this more clear. So then we created the performances. It was, again, during the pandemic. So we filmed the performances and we presented them online. They're still available for free on YouTube, but we also had virtual screenings. So over Zoom, we would screen the performance and then talk about it after. And we created some supplementary materials, which I'll show you in a minute. And then because this was a research project, there's also a data collection component, or I was interested in evaluating these 2 aims. Firstly, was it able to facilitate knowledge exchange and empathy between the participants, which I looked at primarily through interviews with some of the participants. And then I also was interested in the impact on audiences. So we did questionnaires, and of course, we kept track of how many times the videos were watched or shared. Okay, so I'm just going to jump into the dementia performance. The rest of this talk is going to be focused only on the dementia performance, but if you're interested in the Parkinson's performance, it's also on our YouTube. So the main themes or messages that we wanted to focus on in the dementia performance were firstly things lost, things gained. And so there was a lot of discussion in our group about how do we acknowledge the grief and the loss and the tragedy around dementia, but how do we also highlight what is gained, what remains, but also what changes and is gained in the journey of dementia. And that has a lot to do, of course, with how people adapt, how people are resilient in light of dementia, but also there were some key anecdotes or examples of how how a family member saw the person living with dementia differently, or discovered new things about them, or what kind of creative sides maybe came out as well when we're not relying so much on verbal communication, for example. We can talk about this if there are questions about this. I'm happy to get into it more later. So we also talked a lot about shifting relationships, and I'll show you a piece about the shifting relationships. So say between someone living with dementia and a spouse, or a mother and daughter, how does dementia change the relationship landscape? And relatedly, we talked about community support, the importance of community support, not just within the family, but within friends and the larger community, such as AGI, and addressing stigma. So addressing some of the misperceptions around dementia, and also bringing dementia as a topic to younger audiences, for example, children or high school children, high school students who might have a very limited understanding of dementia at that point. And then, as I mentioned, another theme that really came out was resilience and adaptation. How can we adapt, and how can we continue to celebrate and be together in light of dementia? So I mentioned we also produced supplementary materials. I won't go through this in detail, but it's just to say that because art can be quite abstract, we also wanted to give people something more concrete to look at. So if they saw the performance and they weren't quite sure what they got from it, we also had a scene-by-scene description to really highlight what information came together in that scene, or what we were drawing from in each scene. And we created a lot of little videos that highlight different aspects of the project. So some of them go through how we created a specific scene, or others talk about, how it was to bring everyone onto Zoom together. So there are different parts of the project that are highlighted in these videos. So I'm just checking the time to make sure that I'm on track here. Ainsley, if I am going through it too slow, please let me know. But I wanted to take you through some of the scenes, just give an idea of what this performance is. There's about eight, 9 scenes in the performance, and it's really a journey that the artistic director, Jennifer Lecoyer, she really found ways to weave these different scenes together. And I should say, for the dementia performance, there was no one with dementia in the performance. So for our Parkinson's performance, there was a woman with Parkinson's on stage with us. Whereas here, it's really a mix of dance and circus performers. And so, of course, we didn't want to imitate or parody or pretend to have an experience that we don't. So it's quite abstract. We tried to, in each scene, go through different experiences that we through our discussions understood might be an experience of dementia, without putting it into one performer in particular. So that was really important for us to treat it very sensitively and not to create an imitation. So in this scene, neurodegeneration was really based on Claire, her tap dance piece, the art science video that she created at the start, in which she looked at some of the brain changes related to dementia through tap dance. So she would go through a tap dance sequence, and then she would change it slowly to mirror some of the changes at the brain level in dementia. And so this became a dance and a choreography with her tap dancing. And we also projected some images like the one that I showed at the beginning of some of the neuronal microscope images that I took throughout my PhD. So this was really more focused on the science and the changes in the brain that occur in Alzheimer's disease and dementia. The gift scene is a scene that comes up multiple times in the performance, and this is really a celebration and finding ways to adapt and find joy in dementia. And so this was based on one of our participants' stories. It was an anecdote about giving her mother a present, and her mother would forget that she had received a present on her birthday and then rediscover it and open it up again and be so happy to have this present. So it was really, it became a very joyful and humorous moment of just continuous celebration and this opportunity to celebrate even in light of dementia. So that formed this gift scene that comes up several times in different little pockets of the performance. Entangled is a piece in which we used silks. So these are aerial silks that normally hang for aerial circus, but we used it as a way of wrapping everyone up and really thinking about family ties and the way that family is wrapped up in the experience of dementia, and how that can be very isolating as someone with dementia is closed off from others, or the barriers to communication, how we get wrapped up. So that was some of the concepts we were exploring in this piece. We were also thinking about, again, some of the brain changes and some of the, if we think of tangles and amyloid beta plaques, we were kind of recreating some of that imagery as well. But this piece for me was very powerful because the music for it was created. There was a duet that a musician created in talking to someone with dementia and their spouse, actually, who had come to us through AGI, I should say. So thank you very much for your support. But so the duet was created really in talking to them, and then another pair of participants and their family also did an interview with us, and we layered those audio clips onto this piece. So what you're seeing on stage is really grounded in the words and in the reflections and the very intimate thoughts and feelings that were shared by our participants. And so this piece is very evocative, very emotional every time I see it. And then this scene, the memory tornado. So this was based on one of the researchers using the metaphor of a pile of papers as memory loss. So she was saying that in Alzheimer's, particularly in Alzheimer's dementia, the memories, the most recent memories are lost first, and some of the really old memories are retained. And so people might remember, you know, where they were at 6 years old, and have a very, very clear memory of that, but not remember something from the day before. So we imagined it as this pile of papers, and the recent memories are at the top, and then when a fan comes or wind comes, those ones are blown away, but the older memories are retained. So this was a really beautiful metaphor to work with, because when we put that onto the stage, or when we played with that, we had all of these papers. A lot of them were actually from my PhD, so articles I had read in my PhD. We had a stack of papers and we used fans to blow them around. And then we thought about how can we conserve these papers? How can we protect them? how can we hold them between us? What can we do with this paper? If a memory is no longer a memory, what else can we do with it? Can we create something new with those papers? So it really allowed us to experiment with this idea of memory loss, but also how memories are passed on between us and how stories are conserved as a family or as a community. So it was both, again, the grief and the loss, but then finding something new within that and really coming together around what is otherwise a very distressing situation. So that is just a couple of the scenes that I wanted to highlight, but I also wanted to show you one of them. And I will say right away, just to prepare you, that this one is about the shifting relationships. So this really came from talking to some of the family members, particularly spouses, who were experiencing early stages of dementia. So they were talking about how their role, how they were taking on a role of caregiving and how that shifted the support they received from their partner, from their husband in this case, and what they were able to give, and just remarking on those shifts in their marriage or in their romantic relationship. So I just wanted to preface before I go into this performance or into this piece that it is quite emotional. And if you want to step out for this part, I welcome you to do so. Otherwise, we'll also take a break and take questions right after this scene so that we can debrief a bit before I move on. Before I show the scene, I wanted to say that for this, as we were starting to discuss changes in relationship and changes in receiving or giving support, I thought of Agathe and Adrien. So these are circus acrobats, and they do hand-to-hand acrobatics. So as you can see here, Agathe is carrying Adrien, and you'll see in the performance, hand-to-hand acrobatics is really one person is lifting the other person into the air. And usually that ends up being the man lifting the woman in circus. But Agathe and Adrien have been playing a lot with role reversal. And what does it look like when Agathe, who is, maybe 5 feet tall, a little bit taller, but when she lifts this really tall, lanky man, how does that change this kind of roles, the gender roles that we expect? So I thought of them immediately as we started talking about shifting relationships and this change in giving and receiving support. And so we created a choreography together based on, again, the surveys and the discussions that we had with people with dementia and caregivers. So with that said, I'm going to stop sharing my presentation so I can share the video. And the video is about 7 minutes, 6 minutes long. So as I said, if you would like to step out for this part, I welcome you to. If you don't want to see it, or otherwise you're also welcome to see it afterwards. We have a YouTube link where you can see the full performance. Okay, I'll start it.
these three people, these three women are around me. They make me be who I am, and it works, and I'm very fortunate.
You know, that's important to me, that we can talk about our children and our grandchildren and look forward to them coming and look forward to visiting them. And, you know, that to me is important, keeping that connection, you know, like with Tim, because I mean, that's a special connection, right? You know, our ability to, you know, to talk to each other, which is getting harder, but, you know, that we can maintain that, you know.
Sorry, it cut off, cuts the last little melody off, which is a little disruptive. But I did want to say about the music. That was a piece created by one of our musicians, actually around memory consolidation in sleep. And so it was one of the early art science pieces that all of us really loved the music, and it was something we could gather around for this piece. So before we move on, I think we'll take a moment just if there are any questions or comments, and then I'll get into the very last slide of my presentation.
Naila, thus far, I just have a few comments that were written during the sharing of that video. One of the attendees said, "Thank you for your compassion and sensitivity, that it really came across, that this was very moving and powerful, and that they were surprised that so much could be conveyed without words." Those are just some of the comments. If anybody has any questions they'd like to ask now, you can go ahead to the Q&A box and write them, and I'll read them out to Naila. If not, we'll definitely take some time towards the end.
Thanks. Just in relation to that last comment, that's really something we wanted to explore. I think the words, especially the ones you hear at the end, that came from some of our participants, really hammer home the message, and it adds something else. But we really wanted to explore what can be communicated outside of words. Sometimes words aren't enough, or they don't quite capture it. What are some ways that we can capture that or convey that in other ways through other media?
I do have just a few more comments. A lot of people giving thanks, gratitude for sharing this, and speaking about how moving it is to watch.
Thank you. So I'll just go back to my presentation, but Ainsley, if there are questions or comments right away, I can still pause, and otherwise I really have one slide left, so we'll have some time at the end to talk. So can everyone see my presentation again? Ainsley, could you just let me know if it's up?
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay, so let's see. So the last thing that I wanted to just touch upon was the response that we received from audience members. And this is not, we had a whole questionnaire, and we had a place like open-ended questions where they could share comments, and I did a bit of an analysis on that, some of the themes that emerged. I also was really interested in whether the messages that we put into the performance were received, even if they're not verbally communicated. So I did a more comprehensive analysis, but I just wanted to share some of the responses we received. And I should say, this video has been watched many times on YouTube, but this analysis is specifically on 33 questionnaire responses. So it's a smaller sample of the people who have watched this performance. But what came out is that, here's the legend at the bottom. So 5 is somewhat agree, and the dark blue here is strongly agree. So you can see that for the enjoyment of the performance and the artistic quality, the aesthetic of the performance, that was very well received. So most people strongly agreed that it was emotionally engaging, intellectually engaging, and that the artistic quality was high. What these questions here were more around how much did the lived experience of dementia come through? Were people engaged with that content? Did it change their awareness or understanding of dementia? And here we have a bit more of a range. So here the orange is disagree. And it was interesting to think about who were the people watching this performance. Something that I'm very mindful of is that family members, friends, or people with dementia have their own experience of dementia, and we can't represent everyone's experience on stage. And so some of the more critical comments I received were from people with lived experience who felt their experience wasn't represented. And for me, that feedback is very important, because I want to keep building on this performance. And of course, in this positive end of the spectrum, strongly agree, there were a lot of people with experience of dementia, family experience or personal experience, who did think that it resonated and was representative of their experience. But I just want to acknowledge that there's quite a range that we can't capture on stage, and I want to keep building on this work based on that kind of feedback. And we also got more orange, so disagree, somewhat disagree, and neutral around the scientific content of the performance. And for me, that was very interesting, because my goal was to bring scientific knowledge and lived experience onto the stage together. And I think that we succeeded, particularly in providing more context around the performance. So some things can't be conveyed on stage, but then if you follow up by reading the scene by scene description or some of the articles we link to, that's where the scientific content is. But I think in this piece, we really prioritize the emotional and the subjective, because that's what participants were bringing in, and that's what was more important to convey to the audience. And so it really made me question, performance as a science communication tool is different from performance as an awareness tool or to highlight lived experience. And there are certainly ways that that can share the stage, but I don't know if we quite got the balance in this performance. And lastly, I just wanted to share a quote. So this was from one of the participants, or one of the respondents to the questionnaire. I think the biggest value is the chance that a multimedia performance can build cultural practices around dementia that don't push those who are coping with it into a corner and out of sight. And so that was really the goal of the performance and the way that I want to use it moving forward. So actually moving into the next steps, I'm bringing this performance to new audiences. So I'll be presenting a screening at a conference for researchers studying neurodegeneration and Alzheimer's disease. And I'll also be bringing it to the Atlanta Science Festival, so to an international audience. But what I'm doing in these circumstances is not just showing the performance, but then also having a workshop afterwards where we can maybe revisit some of those scenes in a more interactive way, really reflect on, for example, the memory loss, the memory tornado, and really build a new understanding and new cultural practices around dementia, using the performance as a starting point or as an invitation to do so. So with that said, of course, if you would like to share the performance, if you would like to provide feedback or critiques or whatever, I invite you to do so. You can find the performance, as I said, on YouTube. We also have a Facebook page, and you can email me directly if you would like. And I'd like to thank, firstly, AGI for your support in this project. So AGI was really crucial for connecting with community members. And I've also since worked with AGI for Open Minds, Open Hearts, which was also bringing circus students together with people with dementia. And of course, I want to thank the whole team that worked on Peace of Mind. in particular, Jennifer, the artistic director, and Naomi, who was the cinematographer. Thank you very much. I will stop sharing, I think, so that I can see the questions coming in, but I can go back to the slides if there are specific questions on the slides.
Perfect. I did receive a few questions via email. So one individual asked, why did you name the project Peace of Mind? Or, how difficult was it to choose that specific name for such a large project?
That's a very good question. I will give full credit to a fellow researcher and a musician on the project, Anusha Kamesh. So she, very early on, before we had these two performances, before this became my postdoc research, I had started bringing together neuroscientists and dancers and circus performers to explore how we could convey scientific information through dance and music and circus. And in those early days, Anusha suggested that name, and it just really stuck. Like, it was Peace of Mind to me evokes, we all hold a piece of the puzzle. We all hold a different perspective around the mind, around the brain, around being, and we bring those together in this. And for me, that kind of mosaic of our different experiences and knowledge is what I want to capture or what I want to do in this performance and moving forward. So that's how Peace of Mind came to be.
Another question we received, what surprised you most? Whether it was about kind of the process or what surprised you most about the final product?
I think, yeah, that's a good question. And I think it's a slight, the two projects ended up being quite different, the Parkinson's and dementia. And I think everything is a surprise in a way because it's a participatory and an emergent process. And so one of the biggest surprises for me actually was that it exceeded what I thought, what I certainly could do, because we were bringing in other people and other ideas. And so at the beginning of the project, I had no idea what it would look like, or the ideas I had around what the performance would be were not at all the performance at the end. So I was surprised just by the life that it took on. And then I would say the other, as I mentioned in my presentation, I thought it would be easier to bring together scientific research. And it was in terms of the discussions we had throughout the process, but I think science communication and a more didactic approach is very different from engaging people emotionally. And I think I think there's room to grow in that sense. And I think I didn't realize how difficult of a task that was. So maybe that was a surprise too.
And the final question that I received, how can we support your current or future research?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think if you watch the video and it resonates with you, or again, also if it doesn't and you have feedback, that's the best way to support it and to share it with people who you think would be touched by this work. Yeah, any opportunity really to use the video in new ways. So either as a screening or to do a workshop around it, or to bring new audiences to really to have a discussion based on the performance. That is the best way to support the work, I think, and to support what I want to do with it moving forward. I think that's it.
Well, we want to thank you very much, Naila, for your time today. We really appreciate and value it. And I want to thank everybody who attended today's webinar. We will send you an email with the recording so that you can watch this again if you would like to. And we will also send a survey. We would really appreciate if you take just a moment or two to fill it out. We want to continue to best meet your needs and make these as informative and beneficial to you as possible. So thank you all so much again. Thank you, Naila, and I wish everyone a wonderful afternoon. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks all for attending. Bye.
you.